She giggled when she talked about murder. Not out of nerves, not because she misunderstood the gravity of her actions. No. Nanny Doss giggled because she enjoyed it. The same laugh she used when baking pies or chatting with neighbors was the one that escaped her lips when she confessed to killing her husband, and not just him. One by one, she named them. Husbands, children, grandchildren, her mother, her sister, a mother-in-law. As we delve into this video, don't forget to like this video, share with friends, and subscribe to Murder Files for more delve into serial killers' cases. In 1954, Nanny Doss sat calmly across from the detectives in Tulsa, Oklahoma. She smiled warmly, hands folded neatly in her lap, and said, "Yeah, I killed him." She was referring to her fifth husband, but it didn't stop there. Before the interview ended, she had confessed to 10 more murders, each one carried out with a quiet, almost loving efficiency. Her victims were never strangers. They were the people closest to her, the ones who trusted her, relied on her, even loved her. There was Frank Harrelson, husband number 4, who died just after Nanny found letters from another woman hidden in his coat pocket. That night, she made him a special meal. Within hours, he was dead. When the coroner labeled it as heart failure, no one questioned it. Nanny had done what she always did, smiled through the tears, accepted condolences, and moved on. Before Frank, there had been Arlie Lanning, a heavy drinker from North Carolina. He died suddenly, just like the others. Shortly afterward, his mother passed away while Nanny was caring for her. No one thought to question the devoted daughter-in-law who brought flowers to both funerals. Then there was her own flesh and blood. Nanny's daughter, Melvina, had given birth to a healthy baby girl. But one night, while resting from labor, Melvina looked up and saw her mother holding a hairpin over the infant's crib. The next morning, the baby was dead. The cause was listed as unknown. Years later, Nanny would confess to smothering the child. Her 2 sisters died mysteriously after short visits. So did her mother, Louisa Hazel, who passed suddenly while staying at Nanny's home. She had made the mistake of complaining about her health, and Nanny, ever so helpful, offered to prepare her some medicated prune pie. The most heartbreaking was the death of her grandson. After her daughter divorced and returned home, Nanny offered to care for the toddler. Within days, the boy died of asphyxia. No one suspected the sweet grandmother. What tied these deaths together wasn't just the killer's proximity, it was the silence, the consistency. The natural causes listed on each death certificate. Nanny Doss knew how to time her murders, how to mix the poison, and how to cry just enough to be believed. She rarely used violence. Instead, she used coffee, stew, or pie, laced with arsenic or rat poison. Her weapons were everyday comforts, and her motives were buried beneath years of rejection, jealousy, and disappointment. Sometimes she killed for money, collecting small life insurance policies after each death. Sometimes it was for revenge. But most chilling of all, sometimes she just killed because she could. No one connected the dots. Not for decades. By the time detectives finally noticed the pattern, Nanny had left a trail of death across 4 states. She was always smiling, always helpful, always grieving, and then always gone. It was a brisk autumn day in Tulsa, 1954, when the death of Samuel Doss finally raised the red flag that should have been raised years earlier. He was Nanny's 5th husband, a quiet, respectable man, known for being deeply religious and conservative. He wasn't a drinker nor a womanizer. He'd simply wanted a steady life with a steady wife. At first, his death didn't seem suspicious. He'd been hospitalized weeks earlier with a severe stomach ailment. The doctors chalked it up to a digestive issue and sent him home. Nanny, ever the attentive wife, cared for him and offered him his favorite prune cake when he recovered. That night, he was dead. But something about Samuel's case gnawed at the attending physician. His rapid decline didn't match any natural illness. And why had his condition worsened only after he returned home? Why had he improved at the hospital and then suddenly deteriorated once Nanny resumed his care?
The doctor requested an autopsy, a routine request in theory, but unusual in practice at the time, especially for a man his age. Nanny agreed, perhaps a bit too eagerly. After all, she had agreed to every other examination in the past, but this time the results were undeniable. The toxicology report showed a lethal amount of arsenic in Samuel's system. The moment those results were handed over to police, a quiet unease began to build. The detectives who visited Nanny's home found her in her usual pleasant mood, baking, laughing, chatting about her favorite romance novels. When they asked her about the poison, she didn't argue. She didn't cry. She simply nodded and said, "I didn't mean to hurt him. I just didn't want to be lonely." That answer was the beginning of a cascade. Because once she admitted to killing Samuel, the officers pressed further, and Nanny, smiling all the while, kept talking. Names poured out like old memories: husbands, children, family. She didn't falter. She didn't hesitate. At first, the detectives couldn't believe what they were hearing. Surely this woman, the cheerful grandmother who knitted on her porch, was delusional. But as they began to follow her confessions, each one proved to be chillingly accurate. Names matched obituaries. Medical records aligned with her timelines. Deaths that had once seemed natural now stood out like stains. More alarmingly, none of her earlier victims had undergone autopsies. Arsenic poisoning mimicked the symptoms of pneumonia or flu. In a time where medical testing was limited, her crimes had passed unnoticed, cloaked in plausible grief. Newspapers soon got wind of the story. "The Giggling Granny," the headline screamed. Reporters flooded Tulsa, eager to see the woman who poisoned her way through her family tree and laughed while doing it. Police began notifying authorities in other states. The trail led to Alabama, North Carolina, and Kansas. Each state held a piece of her past, each one another silent grave. Nanny didn't run. She didn't deny. Instead, she chatted with officers like she was recounting old recipes or family stories. It was the beginning of one of America's most disturbing serial killer cases. A woman who murdered not out of impulse or rage, but with calm, deliberate calculation. And as they would soon learn, Nanny's past was even darker than they had imagined. Long before the name Giggling Granny would grip the headlines of the 1950s, Nancy Hazel was just a poor farm girl born in 1905 in Blue Mountain, Alabama. The second of 5 children, Nanny's early life was marked not by innocence, but by hardship and control. Her father, James Hazel, was a domineering and abusive man who denied his children formal education and often forced them to work on the farm from dawn till dusk. While other girls went to school or played with friends, Nanny spent her days picking cotton and obeying a strict, joyless routine. One day, during a rare family train trip, Nanny hit her head on a metal bar when the train jolted forward. She was just 7 years old. That blow to the head would leave her with lifelong blackouts, headaches, and memory loss. Years later, psychologists would speculate whether that trauma, combined with years of emotional suppression, played a role in her violent future. As a teenager, Nanny escaped into the pages of romance magazines. The stories of gallant men and doting women became her fantasies. She especially loved the Lonely Hearts columns, where men and women advertised for love. Those columns, decades later, would become her hunting ground. Her first marriage was to Charlie Braggs, a coworker at the local linen factory. She was only 16. Her father approved because Charlie lived with his mother, an arrangement that kept Nanny under another woman's thumb. That marriage produced 4 children, but was quickly poisoned by infidelity, alcoholism, and suspicion. 2 of their children died under mysterious circumstances. Charlie, unnerved, took their oldest daughter and fled. The divorce set the tone for what followed. With each new marriage, Nanny presented herself as the perfect housewife, affectionate, dependable, and nurturing. But inside, a storm brewed. Her disappointment in love turned to quiet rage. If a man cheated, lied, or simply bored her, she found a way to rid herself of him. She married and buried Frank Harrelson, Arlie Lanning, Richard Morton, and finally Samuel Doss. None of them lived to talk about it. Each death was quiet, each was written off, and Nanny always seemed to bounce back, remarried within months.
What made her all the more dangerous was her charm. She was the perfect deception. She smiled in photographs. She told jokes. She kept a tidy home. Her neighbors remembered her as the sweetest woman on the block. No one suspected that her kindness came with a spoonful of arsenic. Her preferred method of killing? Poison. Reflected her personality. Patient, untraceable, and quiet. Arsenic didn't scream. It mimicked illness, turned skin pale, and silenced its victims slowly. Nanny used it with precision, often mixing it into meals or drinks prepared lovingly by her own hands. Behind her mask was a mind shaped by years of repression, loneliness, and fantasy. When reality failed to meet her expectations, she eliminated it, one person at a time. No rage, no blood, just a smile, a laugh, and a deadly goodbye. By the time police peeled away the layers of her history, they realized that Nanny Doss hadn't just tricked her victims. She had fooled an entire country for over 30 years. Nanny Doss didn't kill in a fit of rage. She didn't strike with knives or shoot in bursts of emotion. Her method was slow, methodical, and terrifyingly domestic. She killed with what she called kindness. A slice of pie, a warm cup of coffee, a hearty stew laced with poison. Her weapon of choice? Arsenic. And when arsenic wasn't available, she used rat poison. Both were easy to obtain in the 1930s and 1940s, especially for a woman running a household. That was the first layer of her invisibility. No one suspected the homemaker, and no one questioned sudden deaths that mimicked common illnesses. Her first suspected victims were her own children. 2 of them, reportedly healthy, died in infancy. While their deaths were never confirmed as murders, Nanny's later confessions would cast a grim shadow on those early tragedies. Then came her husband, Charlie Braggs, who fled with their daughter after suspecting that the other children didn't die of natural causes. From there, her pattern took shape. Each marriage began the same way, with laughter, letters, and homemade food. Nanny often met her husbands through Lonely Hearts columns. She painted herself as a sweet Southern woman, recently widowed or heartbroken, looking for companionship. Her letters were warm, romantic, and full of promises. Men were charmed. Some were desperate, and once they welcomed her into their homes, the clock began to tick. Her second husband, Frank Harrelson, was a known alcoholic and abusive. After enduring years of mistreatment, Nanny discovered love letters he had written to another woman. The next morning, Frank was dead. She later claimed she mixed rat poison into his corn whiskey. He drank, passed out, and never woke up. Her third husband, Arlie Lanning, didn't last long. He too was a heavy drinker. After serving him a poisoned breakfast, she attended his funeral with tears and roses. The town praised her as a devoted widow. They didn't know she had killed Arlie's mother shortly after, then set fire to the family home to destroy evidence. When neighbors showed up to console her, she baked them cake. The murders became more brazen. Her fourth husband, Richard Morton, was poisoned just months after they married. She claimed he'd been unfaithful. Before the investigation could start, she moved on to her fifth and final husband, Samuel Doss. Samuel wasn't a drunk or an abuser, but he was stern. He forbade Nanny from reading romance magazines. He criticized her daydreaming. She resented his control. He fell ill after dinner. When he recovered at the hospital, Nanny insisted on bringing him home, and within days,
he was dead. Even her relatives weren't spared. She poisoned her mother after a disagreement. She killed her sister with a special drink. She smothered her infant granddaughter. She took out life insurance policies beforehand or acted out of petty revenge. There were no screams, no visible wounds, just peaceful expressions as if her victims had simply gone to sleep. And through it all, Nanny never stopped smiling. She made her murders look like love. And in a world that never expected a woman, much less a grandmother, to be capable of such cold calculation, she walked free time and again. Until Samuel Doss's death tipped the balance, no one had seen the pattern. But now the trail was undeniable. The autopsies, confessions, and reopened graves all pointed to the same conclusion. Behind the floral dresses and warm laughter was a woman who had turned caregiving into a cover and poison into a signature.
The investigation officially began with the death of Samuel Doss in October 1954. After the autopsy confirmed arsenic poisoning, detectives in Tulsa, Oklahoma were handed a riddle wrapped in pleasantries. Nanny Doss didn't fit the profile of a killer. She baked pies for officers and offered cheerful answers to serious questions, but once they started pressing her, the truth tumbled out like a story she'd been waiting to tell. She confessed to Samuel's murder without resistance. Her reason? He was too controlling and wouldn't let her read her romance books. But the police sensed there was more. They kept her talking, and Nanny obliged. One name led to another state, another unexplained death. She spoke of her previous husbands, each of whom had died under her care. Then came family members, her mother, her sisters, her grandchildren. Each confession had the same rhythm, matter-of-fact, casual, followed by that unnerving giggle. Detectives scrambled to verify her claims. They reached out to police departments and medical examiners in Alabama, North Carolina, and Kansas. Soon, the puzzle pieces aligned. Death certificates showed heart attacks, stomach issues, sudden seizures. None had prompted suspicion at the time, but now every one of them screamed foul play. Authorities began ordering exhumations. When the bodies were examined, arsenic was consistently found in the tissues. In some cases, traces of strychnine or rat poison were also present. There was no longer a question of guilt, only how many more names were left unspoken. Each state opened its own investigation. Alabama officials looked into the deaths of her mother and 2 children. Kansas police revisited the mysterious fire that followed Arlie Lanning's death. North Carolina began inquiries into the unexplained death of Arlie's mother. And in Oklahoma, where it all began, Nanny remained disturbingly compliant. She welcomed interviews. She chatted with reporters as though they were old friends. When asked why she had killed so many people, her answer was simple. I just wanted to find the perfect man. The public was stunned. Headlines blared across the nation. Smiling widow confesses to 11 murders. Lovelorn lady is cold killer. Granny's recipe, a pinch of arsenic, a dash of charm. Nanny became a macabre celebrity. Her mugshot, with that sly grin and cat-eye glasses, was printed in every major paper. Readers were torn between fascination and horror. By late 1954, the law had finally caught up with Nanny Doss. After her chilling confessions and the forensic confirmation of multiple poisonings, there was no ambiguity left. She was arrested, charged with first-degree murder, and held without bail in Tulsa, Oklahoma. But even in custody, Nanny's demeanor baffled investigators and journalists alike. She wasn't angry or remorseful. She was cheerful, giddy even. When asked about her victims, she often let out a soft giggle, as if the whole thing were a dark family joke. I was just tired of him, she said of one husband. He irritated me. That was all. In a world accustomed to murder driven by rage or greed, Nanny's calm demeanor and the scale of her crimes was terrifying. She didn't kill in panic. She killed with patience.
While awaiting trial, she gave multiple interviews. She chatted with reporters as though they were old friends. When asked why she had killed so many people, her answer was simple. "I just wanted to find the perfect man." The public was stunned. Headlines blared across the nation. Smiling widow confesses to 11 murders. Lovelorn lady is cold killer. Granny's recipe, a pinch of arsenic, a dash of charm.
Nanny became a macabre celebrity. Her mugshot, with that sly grin and cat-eye glasses, was printed in every major paper. Readers were torn between fascination and horror. Her court proceedings began in 1955, and though multiple states had grounds to prosecute, Oklahoma took the lead with the case of Samuel Doss. Prosecutors built an airtight case. The autopsy had confirmed arsenic poisoning. Nanny had openly confessed, and her story was corroborated by a history of conveniently timed deaths in every marriage she'd entered. Her defense attorneys never argued innocence. Instead, they attempted to prove she was mentally unfit to stand trial. Psychiatrists examined her, probing for signs of psychosis or delusion. But Nanny didn't babble or break down. She answered every question with clarity and, often, laughter. In one of her interviews, she famously said, "They just wouldn't let me read my stories and watch my programs in peace." To her, these murders weren't acts of horror. They were solutions, quiet exits from lives that no longer pleased her. Faced with her own words and overwhelming forensic evidence, the court had little choice. Nanny Doss pled guilty to the murder of Samuel Doss and was sentenced to life imprisonment. The state of Oklahoma decided against seeking the death penalty, due in part to her gender and public sentiment at the time. Other states, Alabama, North Carolina, Kansas, declined to pursue separate charges, satisfied that she would never be released. In the courtroom, she was calm. When the sentence was read, she smiled politely, adjusted her glasses, and nodded. No tears, no protests. The trial wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. Nanny had already laid everything bare. She'd served coffee to death, loved her victims to the grave, and now she would spend the rest of her life behind bars. Even then, she kept her nickname. Fellow inmates called her Granny. She remained pleasant, chatty, and always a little too happy for someone serving life for murder. Nanny Doss was sentenced to life in prison in 1955 and spent the remaining years of her life at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary for Women in McAlester. Even behind bars, she never lost her unnerving cheerfulness. She tended the prison garden, made small talk with guards, and became oddly popular among fellow inmates. They saw her as harmless, an eccentric, smiling woman who baked cookies and told jokes. Few could reconcile the sweet demeanor with the trail of bodies she'd left behind. She died in the prison hospital on June 2, 1965, of leukemia. There were no headlines this time, no public outcry, no long tributes. Just a passing mention in the local paper. Nanny Doss, confessed serial killer, dies at 59. But for the families she left behind, the scars remained. Her crimes devastated generations. Survivors like her daughter Nelvina struggled not only with grief, but with the knowledge that their mother had killed members of their family, siblings, children, grandparents. Some of them had trusted Nanny with their own lives, unaware that she had taken so many others. Beyond the personal loss, her case sparked national debate about how such a killer could go unnoticed for decades. In the 1950s, the idea of a female serial killer was nearly unthinkable. Murder was, in the public imagination, a man's crime, violent, reckless, rage-fueled. Nanny shattered that perception completely. Her ability to blend in, using marriage, femininity, and social expectations as camouflage, forced law enforcement and forensic experts to reconsider how they approached unnatural deaths within families. In the years that followed, there was a slow but steady change. Autopsies became more common. Insurance payouts for spousal deaths began to face stricter scrutiny. Medical examiners were urged to look twice at sudden, unexplained deaths, especially when a pattern was suspected. Though Nanny never became as infamous as other serial killers in American lore, her story quietly influenced forensic policy and investigative procedures. She had slipped through the cracks too easily, too often. Authorities vowed not to let it happen again. Her story also sparked a dark fascination in the public. Writers, psychologists, and criminologists continued to study her case long after her death. What drove a woman to kill so many of her loved ones? Was it trauma, a mental disorder, or just the cold, calculating nature of someone who never saw life or love as anything but disposable? The most haunting detail was her laughter. She didn't cry when recounting the deaths. She didn't wince when describing the poisoning. She giggled like she was recounting old family gossip.
Nanny Doss didn't fit the mold. That was her greatest weapon. She made people feel safe, and then she killed them. Today, she's remembered not for her body count alone, but for the way she defied every stereotype. The poisoner with the pie, the widow with the wedding ring, the granny with the giggle. Behind her glasses and smile was a lesson America had to learn the hard way. Monsters don't always growl. Sometimes they laugh. What do you think truly drove Nanny Doss to murder her own family? Was it trauma or something much darker beneath the surface? And how many other killers have hidden behind smiles and good manners, undetected, unsuspected? If this story unsettled you, make sure to subscribe for more real-life true crime cases that expose the minds behind the madness. Leave a comment below. Do you believe Nanny was born a killer or made into one by her life circumstances? And one final question to leave you thinking. If someone like Nanny could go unnoticed for decades, how many more are still out there?
I'm sorry for the hurt that I've caused so many people.
She was a grandmother who baked pies and attended church every Sunday. But behind that sweet smile lay a deadly secret. Velma Barfield, the death row granny, was about to become the first woman executed in the United States since 1962. What drove this seemingly harmless woman to commit such heinous crimes? Velma Barfield, born Margie Velma Bullard in the small town of Eastover, North Carolina, raised in a poor, rural family, her early life was marked by hardship and instability. Her father, Murphy Bullard, was known for his violent temper and abusive behavior, creating an atmosphere of fear and tension in the household. Despite these challenges, Velma found solace in school and developed a strong work ethic. She was known for her diligence and academic achievements, traits that would later serve her in various capacities. However, the trauma from her home life left deep emotional scars, influencing her decisions in the years to come. At the age of 16, seeking an escape from her tumultuous home environment, Velma married Thomas Burke in 1949. The couple had 2 children together, and for a time their life seemed stable. But beneath the surface, Velma struggled with personal issues, including chronic pain following a hysterectomy and the onset of back problems. As time passed, Velma's behavior began to change. She became increasingly withdrawn and developed an addiction to prescription medications, including painkillers and tranquilizers. This dependency strained her marriage, and tensions escalated between her and Thomas. In April 1969, after an argument, Velma and their children left the house. Upon returning, they found their home had burned down, and Thomas was dead. The fire was ruled accidental, but questions lingered about the circumstances surrounding his death. Following Thomas's death, Velma's life took a darker turn. She remarried in 1970 to Jennings Barfield, a widower. Their marriage was short-lived, ending with Jennings' death from what was believed to be heart complications in 1971. In the years that followed, Velma's behavior became more erratic. She began working as a caregiver for the elderly, a role that would place her in close proximity to vulnerable individuals. It was during this time that a pattern of mysterious deaths began to emerge. The stage was set for a chilling revelation. As we delve into this video, don't forget to like this video, share with friends, and subscribe to Murder Files for more delve into true crime cases.
In the early 1970s, Velma Barfield began working as a caregiver, providing support for elderly men and women in their homes. It was a seemingly altruistic role, one that required trust and compassion. But unbeknownst to those who relied on her care, Velma was far from the nurturing figure they believed her to be. Instead, she was already plotting her next move, each death bringing her closer to a deadly pattern. Her first known victim was her own mother, who in 1974 fell ill after eating dinner prepared by Velma. The symptoms were consistent with food poisoning, nausea, vomiting, and abdominal pain. Doctors could not pinpoint the cause, and her mother's death was attributed to natural causes. Velma, always the gracious daughter, played the part of the grieving caretaker. No one suspected a thing. But this was only the beginning. In the same year, another elderly man under Velma's care, John Henry Lee, began showing similar symptoms after eating food prepared by Velma. His condition deteriorated rapidly, and within a few days, he was dead. His cause of death was also attributed to natural causes, and once again, no foul play was suspected. At this point, Velma's method was becoming clearer: poison. It was easy for Velma to hide her tracks. She carefully controlled what her patients ate, often preparing meals herself and ensuring no one else saw what was being added to them. Her poison of choice, rat poison and arsenic, was easy to acquire and undetectable at first, leaving no signs of foul play. She used these substances with chilling precision, each dose calculated and designed to be slow and gradual, so no one would suspect murder. But something was different this time. With each death, Velma grew bolder. In 1974, after the death of another patient, the police began to take notice. There were just too many elderly deaths surrounding Velma for it to be pure coincidence. Authorities began to question her, but Velma's demeanor remained calm. She was the picture of composure, always playing the role of the innocent caretaker. Still, there was one element that couldn't be ignored. The circumstances surrounding the deaths were beginning to seem eerily similar. Patients who had no prior history of illness were dying after eating meals prepared by Velma, and every time the cause was a slow and mysterious decline in health. Despite suspicions, Velma's charm and friendly demeanor continued to disarm those around her. She seemed like the perfect person to entrust a loved one to, but behind her smile, she was growing more confident in her ability to get away with murder. The questions now were, how many deaths had there been? And was Velma's role as a caregiver merely a convenient cover, or was there a far darker truth lurking beneath her calm exterior?
By 1977, the pattern was undeniable. The town of Spring Lake, where Velma had settled, was beginning to notice the string of deaths. In 1977, Velma started a relationship with another elderly man named Thomas Burke, not to be confused with her first husband. He was a kind, retired man who trusted Velma to care for him during his declining health. Thomas's family had heard rumors about Velma's past, but they dismissed them, believing she was just a sweet, elderly woman doing a good deed. It was during this time that the true nature of Velma's actions began to surface. Thomas began to experience symptoms similar to those of Velma's previous victims: nausea, vomiting, weakness, and abdominal pain. He was hospitalized for a short time, but seemed to improve. However, Velma's sinister hand had not yet finished its work. In a final twisted act, Velma prepared a meal for Thomas, laced with arsenic. His health deteriorated quickly, and this time the family was on alert. Thomas died within a few days, and his family, increasingly suspicious of the strange circumstances, decided to request an autopsy. When the results came back, they were startling. Arsenic was found in Thomas's system. The doctors were shocked. Arsenic poisoning was not common, and it was clear that this was no ordinary death. The authorities were called, and a full investigation was launched into the cause of death. As the investigators pieced together the evidence, they began to realize that Thomas's death was far from an isolated incident. The police had already started re-examining previous deaths Velma had been associated with, and they found more disturbing patterns. The victims, most of them elderly, had died in similar ways, after eating food prepared by Velma, often after suffering from nausea and stomach pain. Velma's calm demeanor, however, made her an unlikely suspect. She smiled in the face of the investigators, continued to act the part of the sweet caregiver, and expressed disbelief when confronted with the evidence. Her charm, though, was beginning to wear thin. The investigation continued, but the crucial pieces were falling into place. What had once seemed like unfortunate coincidences were now being connected through one key factor: Velma Barfield, the unassuming woman who had been poisoning her victims for years.
The investigation into Velma Barfield had reached a boiling point, and the police were ready to confront her with the mounting evidence. As they brought her in for questioning, the atmosphere was tense. She had been a model of composure throughout the investigation, almost too calm for a woman who was now a prime suspect in multiple deaths. The officers could sense something was off, but they had no idea just how chilling her confession would be. During the interrogation, Velma sat across from the detectives, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She was polite, smiling occasionally, as though she were merely answering questions about an old acquaintance. But beneath her serene exterior, the truth was beginning to surface. Velma's first response was typical of her calm demeanor. She denied any wrongdoing and insisted that she was simply a kind-hearted woman who had been unfortunate enough to be around people who had fallen ill. But as the detectives pressed her, something changed in the room. The tone shifted, and Velma began to speak. With an almost eerie nonchalance, Velma admitted to poisoning her victims, not just once, but several times over the course of her caregiving career. Her first victim had been her own mother, but it wasn't the last.
She went on to confess that, over the years, she had poisoned at least 6 elderly people in her care, including Thomas Burke, whose death had sparked the investigation. But the most chilling part of Velma's confession wasn't just her admission to the murders. It was how casually she spoke about them. She explained that she had poisoned her victims to escape the burden of caregiving. She saw herself as a martyr, a woman trapped in a thankless role, and each death gave her a sense of relief. Her victims, she said, just faded away in her care, as though they were no more than burdens she had chosen to remove. When the investigators asked her why she had chosen poison, slow, deliberate, and nearly undetectable, Velma explained that it was the perfect method. It's just so quiet, and no one can figure out what happened, she remarked, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. She described how she carefully measured the poison into meals, ensuring that the deaths were slow enough to avoid suspicion, but fast enough to give her peace. As the confession unfolded, the detectives were left speechless. Here was a woman who had killed repeatedly, methodically, and without remorse. She was almost proud of her ability to fool everyone around her, from family members to medical professionals. And now she was sitting in front of them, almost gleeful in her openness about her crimes. What was even more disturbing was the fact that Velma didn't appear to care about the lives she had taken. She showed no remorse, no grief, only a calm, almost detached demeanor as she recounted the details of each murder. Her ability to turn her emotions on and off, to compartmentalize her actions so easily, only added to the chilling nature of the case. As the confession came to an end, Velma sat back, almost as though she had finished a casual conversation. She was no longer just a caregiver. She was a serial killer, a woman who had taken multiple lives for her own twisted sense of relief. And now her secrets were out, but the full extent of her crimes was still to be uncovered.
Velma Barfield's confession had sent shockwaves through the small town of Spring Lake and beyond. What had once seemed like isolated incidents, the deaths of elderly people in her care, was now undeniably linked to a single individual. The calm, grandmotherly figure who had made meals and cared for the elderly was now revealed to be a cold-blooded killer, methodically poisoning her victims for years. With her confession in hand, the stage was set for one of the most talked-about trials in the history of South Carolina. Velma's trial began in early 1978, and it didn't take long for the media to seize upon it. Journalists from across the country descended on the small courthouse, eager to cover the sensational case. They were captivated by the contrast between Velma's outward appearance, sweet, elderly, and grandmotherly, and the horrific crimes she had confessed to. Headlines screamed of the death row granny, or the Giggling Granny, as the press dubbed her. The media was relentless, sensationalizing every aspect of the case, from her calm confession to her eerie, almost nonchalant demeanor in court. As the trial unfolded, it became clear that the prosecution had a strong case. Velma had confessed to murdering 6 people, and the evidence was irrefutable. Autopsies had confirmed arsenic poisoning in all of her victims, and several witnesses testified to her strange behavior in the days leading up to the deaths. But there was something unsettling about Velma's presence in the courtroom, her calm, almost detached nature. As the prosecution laid out her case, Velma sat silently, offering no defense and showing little emotion. Her defense team tried to paint her as a woman who had been driven to her crimes by years of abuse and personal suffering. They argued that she was a product of her troubled past, from her abusive father to her broken marriages. The defense also tried to bring up her struggles with chronic pain and addiction to prescription medication, claiming that these factors clouded her judgment. But this attempt at sympathy was met with skepticism, as the public had already made their minds. They couldn't reconcile the image of the sweet, church-going grandmother with the cold killer she had revealed herself to be.
The prosecution pushed forward, arguing that Velma's actions were not the result of mental illness or overwhelming hardship, but of a calculated, methodical desire for control and convenience. She had chosen poison because it was the perfect weapon, slow, effective, and nearly impossible to trace until it was too late. The prosecution painted her as a woman who had murdered for the sole purpose of escaping the burdens of caregiving and financial strain, showing no regard for the lives she had taken. The trial culminated in a swift conviction. Velma Barfield was found guilty of the murder of Thomas Burke, her final victim, the one whose family had demanded an autopsy and uncovered the truth. As she was sentenced to death, Velma's demeanor remained unchanged. She offered no apology, no sign of remorse, only the same placid smile that had disarmed everyone around her for so long. The media circus around the trial didn't end with the conviction. The public was fascinated by the Giggling Granny, the sweet old woman who had become one of America's most notorious female serial killers in American history. Journalists camped outside the courthouse, writing stories about her cold demeanor, the way she laughed during her confession, and her bizarre behavior throughout the trial. Some even speculated about her psychological state, but the majority of the public saw her as an unrepentant killer, a woman who had taken lives without a second thought. As the trial ended and the sentencing was handed down, Velma Barfield's story became a national sensation. The public could not shake the image of a sweet elderly woman who had committed such unspeakable acts. Velma would forever be remembered as one of America's most chilling serial killers, a grandmother who had poisoned her way through several lives, leaving behind nothing but her calm, eerie smile. But the most chilling part of Velma's confession wasn't just her admission to the murders, it was how casually she spoke about them. She explained that she had poisoned her victims to escape the burden of caregiving. She saw herself as a martyr, a woman trapped in a thankless role, and each death gave her a sense of relief. Her victims, she said, just faded away in her care, as though they were no more than burdens she had chosen to remove. When the investigators asked her why she had chosen poison, slow, deliberate, and nearly undetectable, Velma explained that it was the perfect method. "It's just so quiet, and no one can figure out what happened," she remarked, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. She described how she carefully measured the poison into meals, ensuring that the deaths were slow enough to avoid suspicion, but fast enough to give her peace. As the confession unfolded, the detectives were left speechless. Here was a woman who had killed repeatedly, methodically, and without remorse. She was almost proud of her ability to fool everyone around her, from family members to medical professionals, and she was now sitting in front of them almost gleeful in her openness about her crimes. What was even more disturbing was the fact that Velma didn't appear to care about the lives she had taken. She showed no remorse, no grief, only a calm, almost detached demeanor as she recounted the details of each murder. Her ability to turn her emotions on and off, to compartmentalize her actions so easily, only added to the chilling nature of the case. As the confession came to an end, Velma sat back, almost as though she had finished a casual conversation. She was no longer just a caregiver. She was a serial killer, a woman who had taken multiple lives for her own twisted sense of relief. And now her secrets were out. But the full extent of her crimes was still to be uncovered.
After Velma Barfield's conviction, she was transferred to the South Carolina State Penitentiary, where she was placed on death row. It was here, in the stark isolation of her prison cell, that Velma would spend the next few years of her life, facing the inevitable punishment for her crimes. But even in the confines of death row, Velma's story took unexpected turns, twists that would leave both the public and her legal team questioning the true nature of her actions. At first, Velma seemed unfazed by her sentence. The woman who had shown no remorse in the courtroom continued to display an unsettling calm in her new surroundings. Despite the gravity of her crimes, she behaved like a model inmate, following the rules and spending her days reading romance novels, knitting, and praying. She became a regular fixture at the prison chapel, where she would pray for forgiveness, though it was unclear whether she was truly repentant or simply maintaining her carefully crafted persona. Despite her lack of visible remorse, Velma's case garnered attention from religious groups, death penalty activists, and even the media, all of whom began to question whether a woman like her deserved to be executed. The public's perception of her had shifted over time. While she had been labeled a cold, calculating killer, some began to see her as a victim of circumstance, an abused woman who had suffered mental anguish for years. They wondered whether she was truly guilty of murder or if her troubled past had driven her to the unthinkable. Velma herself seemed to recognize the change in public opinion. She became more open with her fellow inmates and prison staff, sharing details of her past and, for the first time, expressing some form of remorse. She spoke of her abusive upbringing, her failed marriages, and the chronic pain that had plagued her for years. Many of the prison chaplains and counselors who spoke to Velma noted that she had appeared to find some sort of peace in her final years. But whether this newfound peace was genuine or a carefully constructed facade was still up for debate. The question that haunted many was whether Velma Barfield truly understood the gravity of her actions. She had killed not out of self-defense, not out of passion, but out of convenience, choosing to end the lives of those who had become burdens to her. Yet she never seemed to fully grasp the extent of her cruelty. Instead, she spoke of her victims in a detached manner, almost as though they were characters in a story, rather than real people with families and lives of their own. In 1982, after years of legal battles, Velma's case took another unexpected twist. Her execution date was set, and the final stages of her time on death row began. However, just as her execution was nearing, a series of appeals raised questions about the fairness of her trial and the evidence used to convict her. Lawyers argued that her confession had been coerced and that she had not received proper psychiatric evaluations. These appeals led to a temporary stay of execution, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though Velma's life might be spared. But as the legal process dragged on, public opinion began to shift again. Her supporters, who had once rallied behind her, began to lose faith in her claim of innocence and remorse. By 1984, the legal battles were over, and the execution order was reinstated. The state of South Carolina had made its decision. Velma Barfield would be executed for the murders of her elderly victims, and there would be no further appeals.
The day had finally come. After years of legal battles, delays, and public debates, Velma Barfield was set to face the consequences of her crimes. She had been on death row for nearly 6 years, her fate hanging in the balance with each passing year. But on November 2, 1984, Velma's time had run out. The quiet, grandmotherly woman who had poisoned her way through the lives of vulnerable elderly people was about to be executed. Velma's final hours were marked by a strange calmness that had defined much of her time on death row. As she prepared for her execution, she refused to be emotional or show fear. Those who were with her during the final moments described her as serene, almost eerily so. She was allowed to meet with her spiritual advisor and a few close friends. But she didn't express regret for her actions in a meaningful way. Her demeanor remained composed as she faced the inevitable. In the hours leading up to the execution, Velma made a statement to the media. She denied any guilt for the murders she had committed. While she had confessed in the past, her final words were filled with ambiguity. "I'm sorry for the hurt that I have caused," she said. But whether she was truly sorry for the lives she had taken or simply for the suffering that had come with her arrest and conviction was unclear. It was a final, cold admission of responsibility without any clear expression of remorse or deep regret. The execution itself was set to take place at the South Carolina State Penitentiary, and the media had gathered in force. The public was captivated by this rare spectacle, the first woman to be executed in the U.S. in over 20 years. Velma's case had garnered national attention, both for the horror of her crimes and for the perplexing image of a sweet elderly woman who had committed them. At 6 p.m., Velma was escorted to the death chamber. She was calm, her hands clasped in front of her, as she was seated in the electric chair. The executioner prepared the chamber, and the last rituals of her life were conducted in silence. There were no screams, no protests, just the low hum of the machinery as the minutes ticked by. At 6:15 p.m., the switch was pulled. The electrical current coursed through Velma's body. She was pronounced dead at 6:22 p.m. It was over. In the aftermath of Velma Barfield's execution, there were mixed reactions. For some, justice had finally been served for the lives she had taken. For others, her case remained a disturbing example of the complexity of the death penalty, how society viewed her as both a victim of her past and a monstrous killer. Her execution brought closure to the families of her victims, but it also left lingering questions about the true nature of her guilt and remorse. Velma Barfield died a convicted serial killer, but in her final moments, the world still questioned who she really was: the sweet grandmother who poisoned her loved ones, or the victim of an abusive past who simply became a monster in her own right.
Velma Barfield's case left an unsettling legacy that still resonates today. As the first woman executed in the U.S. since 1962, she became a national sensation. Her nickname, the Giggling Granny, highlighted the contrast between her sweet grandmotherly image and her gruesome crimes. This eerie juxtaposition haunted the public, making her one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. Velma's execution was met with mixed reactions. Some viewed it as justice for the lives she had taken, while others saw her as a tragic figure, shaped by years of abuse and psychological trauma. Many questioned whether her troubled past had pushed her toward violence, making her not just a killer, but a victim of circumstance. Her story sparked continued debate over the death penalty, especially regarding women. Velma's execution raised questions about whether gender and past trauma should influence sentencing for violent crimes. In the years following her death, Velma became an icon in popular culture, featured in crime documentaries and books. Her case remains a chilling reminder of how evil can hide behind the most unassuming facades, and her name is forever etched in the history of American crime. Velma Barfield's chilling story forces us to question how far someone will go when pushed to the edge, and what makes a monster. What do you think? Was she a product of abuse, or was she simply evil?
In the quiet town of Perry, Florida, a series of unthinkable deaths would soon raise questions that no one could answer. Over the course of just a few years, 5 children and 1 elderly man lost their lives under the care of a seemingly trustworthy babysitter. But the truth would shatter any illusions of innocence. This is the disturbing case of Christine Falling, the babysitter from hell. Welcome to Murder Files, where we dive deep into the darkest corners of true crime. In today's episode, we uncover the shocking story of Christine Falling, a woman who turned the lives of those around her into a deadly game of control and murder. Stay tuned and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a chilling tale from the world of true crime. Christine Laverne Slaughter was born on March 12, 1963, in Perry, Florida, to an unstable and fractured family. Her father, Thomas, was 65 years old when she was born, and her mother, Anne, was only 16. Christine's early life was far from typical, as her parents were ill-equipped to provide the stability and care a young child needs. Poverty and neglect marked her childhood, and she would spend much of her early years in and out of orphanages. Despite these challenges, Christine's story would only get darker. From the start, there were signs that something was not right. By the time she was a teenager, she had already experienced a failed marriage at the age of 14. Her first husband, 20 years her senior, left her after just 6 weeks. This failed union would mark the beginning of Christine's troubled adult life, but it was only the tip of the iceberg. As Christine entered her late teens, she was diagnosed with epilepsy and considered mentally challenged. She was never able to fully integrate into a normal school system, often experiencing hallucinations and bouts of confusion. Her behavior became increasingly erratic, and her lack of control over her impulses only deepened. By the time she was 16, she was deemed incapacitated under medical advice and could no longer manage a regular life without assistance. Christine was in and out of hospitals during these years, frequently seeking treatment for her health issues, including irregular menstrual cycles and mental instability. Despite these challenges, she found ways to earn money by babysitting for neighbors and friends in her local area. But what seemed like a way for Christine to earn some income was in fact the beginning of a terrifying pattern. In 1980, she began working as a babysitter, taking care of children in the community while their parents were away. Her references seemed solid enough, and her reputation was that of an ordinary young woman trying to make a living. Little did anyone know, Christine's babysitting gigs would become her dark stage for unspeakable acts. What appeared to be the harmless job of watching children would soon spiral into a nightmare no one could have anticipated. As Christine settled into her role as a trusted caregiver, it wasn't long before her dark urges began to surface. But at this point, no one suspected that this seemingly ordinary young woman was capable of something far more sinister. It was a cold February day in 1980 when Christine received her first babysitting job in Blountstown, Florida. The parents of 2-year-old Cassidy Johnson had no reason to suspect that their child would not return home. They had asked Christine to care for Cassidy, believing she was a responsible young woman capable of handling the task. The following day, Cassidy was taken to the hospital, where doctors diagnosed her with encephalitis, a brain infection that was often fatal in young children. Within days, Cassidy was dead. Her parents were devastated. The cause of death, encephalitis, seemed clear at the time, and no one thought to question the circumstances surrounding the child's sudden illness. However, as time passed, doubts began to arise. An autopsy revealed something shocking. The child's skull bore signs of blunt force trauma. The family was informed that Cassidy's cause of death wasn't solely attributed to encephalitis. Something else had happened, something darker. The police took notice of the discrepancies. Could it be that Cassidy's death was not simply a tragic medical condition? Could Christine have been involved? A doctor had even recommended investigating the matter further, suggesting that there may have been foul play. But in an unfortunate twist of fate, the recommendation was lost in a bureaucratic shuffle, and the case was eventually closed without further inquiry. Christine, however, remained unfazed. She spoke about Cassidy's death in the same detached manner as she did everything else. She claimed that the child had fallen from her crib and passed out. Despite the inconsistencies in her story, no one questioned her. No one could have suspected the truth, that a young woman who had once been a troubled teenager struggling with emotional instability was now hiding a terrifying secret. The case was ruled as an unfortunate accident, and Christine was free to move on. But her next job, just months later, would set the stage for a pattern of death that would soon spiral out of control. It was clear now, Christine Falling was no ordinary babysitter, but no one could yet fathom the horrors she would unleash. She was just getting started. By the time the summer of 1980 arrived, Christine had moved on from her first tragic babysitting job and was living in Lakeland, Florida. She had worked as a babysitter before, but this time she took on a heavier responsibility, looking after more children from local families. Her reputation was untainted, and her quiet demeanor made her an ideal caregiver in the eyes of the parents who hired her. Yet again, tragedy would strike. In early summer, Christine was hired to babysit 4-year-old Jeffrey Davis. He was a happy, energetic child, but his life would be tragically cut short while under Christine's watch. Just a few days later, Jeffrey was dead. The official cause of death was myocarditis, a rare but serious heart condition. The doctors explained that it could happen suddenly and without warning, even in a child as young as Jeffrey. A few days after Jeffrey's death, tragedy struck again. This time, it was 2-year-old Joseph Spring, another child who had been in Christine's care while she was babysitting Jeffrey. He was diagnosed with a viral infection and passed away shortly thereafter. His parents, devastated by the loss of their child, couldn't understand how both of their sons could die so unexpectedly. The same babysitter had been watching them. Though doctors believed the viral infection was responsible for Joseph's death, the connection between the deaths of both children raised alarm bells. No one could explain the coincidence of 2 children dying within such a short span of time while under Christine's care. The eerie similarities between the deaths made those closest to the situation uneasy.
Christine, however, remained calm. She offered no explanation for the sudden deaths of the 2 children she had cared for. She did not express the remorse one would expect from someone who had witnessed such devastating losses. In fact, she seemed unaffected, as though this tragedy was just another part of life. Her response to the situation was chillingly indifferent. As word of the deaths spread, whispers of suspicion began to grow. Was this truly a case of bad luck? Was it a series of unfortunate coincidences, or was something far more sinister at play? But despite the mounting questions, no one had concrete evidence to connect Christine to the deaths. As the investigation faltered, Christine moved on once again, continuing her work as a trusted babysitter. But the pattern had already begun, and as each death seemed to echo the last, it became clear that something much darker was taking root. Christine Falling's life seemed to continue without interruption. She had grown accustomed to the quiet towns she moved through, working as a caregiver, always leaving behind a trail of destruction, but never once drawing attention to herself. In 1981, she found herself back in her hometown of Perry, Florida, where she began working as a nursing assistant. It seemed like a fresh start for Christine as she took on a new role caring for elderly patients. Her work at a local nursing home brought her in contact with more vulnerable individuals, some of whom were too frail to fend for themselves. But it also gave Christine the perfect opportunity to strike once again. On the same day she started working for 77-year-old William Swindle, the elderly man was found unresponsive in his kitchen. He had been in good health prior to this, and his family had no reason to believe anything was amiss. He had been living alone, but had hired Christine to assist with daily tasks and provide companionship during his later years. When William collapsed, he was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. He was pronounced dead soon after arrival. The official cause of death was not immediately suspected to be foul play, and William's family was left to grieve the unexpected loss. Yet there were whispers among the staff who had worked with Christine. Some of them had found it odd that William's health had seemed to decline so rapidly after Christine arrived on the scene.
The investigation into his death was inconclusive. His sudden passing was officially ruled as natural causes, and nothing more was done. But there were disturbing details that began to emerge. William had been in relatively good health before Christine's arrival, and no one could fully explain why his condition had deteriorated so quickly. Still, as was the case with her previous victims, Christine was not under suspicion. It seemed that every time Christine moved to a new town, tragedy followed. She was once again allowed to slip through the cracks, and no one connected her to the death of William Swindle. Yet, it would not be long before her pattern would once again repeat itself. Christine had already set her sights on new victims. As the deaths continued, no one could yet piece together the disturbing reality that she was the one linking them all. As 1981 progressed, Christine's pattern of deadly encounters continued, with each new tragedy building upon the last. She had left a trail of unanswered questions and devastated families in her wake, but she remained under the radar, seemingly untouchable. It wasn't until the fall of 1981 that the darkness Christine harbored would strike once more, this time with a victim who would be too close to home. In late 1981, Christine began working as a caregiver for her own half-sister, whose baby daughter, 8-month-old Jennifer Daniels, would become her next victim. The circumstances surrounding Jennifer's death would mirror the eerie pattern Christine had established in previous years. Jennifer's parents trusted Christine, believing she would take good care of their baby while they were away. But tragedy struck just hours later. Jennifer stopped breathing while left alone in the car, an event that shocked the family. The official cause of death was later deemed to be sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS, an explanation that often arises when no other cause of death can be pinpointed. However, the family couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The timing was just too perfect. Christine had been alone with Jennifer for a short period of time before the baby's sudden death. It was a tragic coincidence, but at the time, no one could connect the dots. Christine's cold and emotionless demeanor raised even more suspicion. She did not seem devastated by the loss of her own niece. Instead, she remained eerily calm, offering no explanation and displaying no sorrow or remorse. Her behavior was chillingly detached, as though the death of Jennifer Daniels was no more significant than any of the previous ones. Doctors ruled out foul play and dismissed the possibility of a connection to Christine's past. After all, SIDS was a common diagnosis for sudden infant deaths, and there was no obvious evidence that Christine had anything to do with Jennifer's passing. But the whispers had started. Family members, friends, and those who had worked with Christine couldn't ignore the growing unease. Was this simply a tragic coincidence, or was Christine once again involved in another unexplained death? Despite the growing suspicions, no one had definitive proof, and Christine moved on, her dark pattern continuing unchecked. The pattern of deaths she had so carefully concealed had now claimed another life, but once again no one could connect the pieces. As the investigation into Jennifer's death stalled, Christine's web of deception tightened. She would soon find her next victim. It wasn't until the summer of 1982 that the unthinkable happened. Christine, now deeply embedded in her twisted pattern of death, would soon face a turning point, one that would unravel everything she had so carefully hidden. The victim this time was 10-week-old Travis Coleman, a baby whose life would be tragically cut short while in Christine's care. This time, the circumstances were different. There would be no excuse for the tragedy that followed. Travis had been left in Christine's hands while his parents took care of errands. In the few hours they were gone, a horrific crime took place. Travis was found dead, and an autopsy revealed something shocking: internal injuries consistent with suffocation. For the first time, the investigation focused on Christine. It was clear now that this was not an accidental death. This was the result of deliberate, calculated actions. As the evidence mounted, Christine's behavior became more erratic. The doctors, who had initially been quick to dismiss her previous actions, now had no choice but to confront the grim reality. This was no isolated incident. Christine's past, the trail of deaths she had left behind, could no longer be ignored. The pattern was unmistakable.
When police questioned Christine about Travis's death, she cracked. For the first time, she admitted to her crimes. She confessed that she had been hearing voices that told her to kill the babies in her care. She revealed how she had suffocated her victims with pillows, blankets, and her bare hands. Her confession was chilling in its detachment, as though the horrific acts were mere steps in an ongoing, inevitable cycle. Christine claimed that the voices were compelling her to commit these acts, that she had no control over her actions. She said that she felt like she was following orders, unable to stop herself. The confession was unsettling, but it did little to explain why someone who seemed so ordinary, so seemingly trustworthy, could commit such monstrous acts. Her confession sent shockwaves through the small towns where she had lived and worked. The families of her victims, already devastated by their losses, were left reeling. The authorities now had the undeniable evidence they needed to link her to at least 3 murders: Cassidy Johnson, Jennifer Daniels, and now Travis Coleman. But Christine wasn't finished yet. As the investigation continued, more dark secrets began to surface. What had driven her to commit such atrocities? Was there more to her past than anyone had realized? The truth was more terrifying than anyone could have imagined, and Christine was just beginning to reveal the depths of her madness. The chilling details of Christine Falling's confessions sent shockwaves throughout the small communities she had once inhabited. As she admitted to the murders of Cassidy Johnson, Jennifer Daniels, and Travis Coleman, the investigation quickly intensified. Christine's nonchalant demeanor during her confession only added to the disturbing nature of her crimes. There was no sign of remorse in her words, no tears, no hesitation, just a cold, clinical recounting of each murder, as though they were simply tasks she had been compelled to complete. As police began to gather all the pieces of Christine's dark past, the full scope of her actions came into focus. It was revealed that while there had been suspicions surrounding the previous deaths of Jeffrey Davis, Joseph Spring, and William Swindle, there had been no conclusive evidence to connect Christine to their deaths. But now, with her confession and the evidence in hand, Christine was finally facing the consequences of her actions. In December of 1982, Christine Falling pled guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Despite the severity of her crimes, the death penalty was not on the table for Christine. Her defense attorneys argued that she had been mentally unstable at the time of the murders, a claim that ultimately spared her life. She was sent to the Lowell Correctional Institution in Ocala, Florida, where she would begin serving her sentence. Christine's case, though resolved legally, left the public reeling. People couldn't understand how someone who seemed so ordinary, so seemingly trustworthy, could commit such monstrous acts. Her claim of hearing voices was unsettling, but it didn't fully explain the motives behind her killings. The families of Christine's victims, forever scarred by the deaths of their loved ones, were left to pick up the pieces. They could never truly heal from the loss of their children and loved ones, but they were granted some solace in the fact that Christine was behind bars, where she could do no more harm. In 2017, Christine attempted to gain parole, but her request was denied. She remains in prison, still a mystery to those who study her case.
She continues to be a subject of both fascination and fear, as experts try to understand the psychology of a woman who became one of the most chilling female killers in Florida's history. Christine Falling's case left a trail of devastation that never fully healed for the families of her victims. For them, no amount of justice could ever replace the lives she took: Cassidy, Jennifer, and Travis. Their grief became an ongoing burden that shaped their lives forever. Christine's name became synonymous with terror, not just in Florida, but nationwide. Her story raised uncomfortable questions about the safety of children in the care of trusted individuals. How could someone who seemed so ordinary, so unremarkable, be capable of such horrors? Christine's case highlighted the danger of assuming that the people closest to us are always safe. The public's fascination with Christine only deepened over time. Her lack of remorse and chilling claims about hearing voices made her a figure of both fear and intrigue. Despite a parole hearing in 2017, Christine remains behind bars, and her parole request for 2024 is unlikely to succeed. For the families of her victims, the pain never truly goes away. Christine's crimes serve as a reminder that evil can hide behind the most innocent facades. Her story is a tragic warning of how trust can be violated, and the aftermath of such betrayal is something that no amount of justice can erase. If this story left you shaken, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more true crime cases that uncover the darkness hiding behind seemingly ordinary lives. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below with your reactions or any cases you'd like us to cover next. Stay vigilant, stay aware, and remember, the truth is often darker than we imagine.